the last team that we have to talk about the Washington Commanders. Not the Washington football team, the Washington Commanders. So Washington had a really disappointing season. They went 7-10. Now, if you guys have been watching this podcast for at least a year, you got to remember that I had Washington, making the playoffs. And I had them winning the division. And they didn't come nowhere close to any of the expectations that I had for them. And I'm not going to call Washington overrated. I felt like Washington definitely could have made it to the postseason, at least before the start of the regular season. It's just that, I overlooked a lot of things when it came to the Washington Commanders. Like, maybe I gave Ron Rivera too much credit for the success that he had year one, because you got to take into account that the NFC East was the worst division in football. So Washington didn't really have to win too many games to get into the postseason. On top of that, there was, the quarterback situation. Washington signed Ryan Fitzpatrick. I thought that Ryan Fitzpatrick would be good enough to get Washington to the postseason. And that didn't happen because Ryan Fitzpatrick got his season cut short very early and never returned. So then you had to insert Taylor Heinicke. And a lot of Washington Commanders fans, were really high on Taylor Heinicke. And some people thought that maybe he could be their franchise quarterback when you look at the performance that he had in the playoffs against Tampa Bay. And although they lost that game, he performed immaculate in that game against the Buccaneers. It kind of was like a little bit magical, but now looking at Taylor Heinicke, we start to realize more that he's just a really good backup. And there's nothing wrong with having a really good backup quarterback. But in terms of seeing Taylor Heinicke as the starting quarterback moving forward, that's probably not going to happen. And it looks like Washington is committing every single thing they have to getting a quarterback. As a matter of fact, I saw one report that came out that said that Washington is willing to trade any player for a franchise quarterback, for Aaron Rodgers, for Russell Wilson, for Deshaun Watson. Now, I don't know how true that is. Get what I'm saying? Like I just said, that is a rumor, but we pretty much get the point. We know that Washington is going all out for trying to improve the quarterback position. Now, the next question is going to be, who are they going to improve the quarterback position with? Now, a lot of Washington fans are hoping that they can land Deshaun Watson. However, I think that has like a 10% chance of happening. And the reason why I think that it has a 10% chance of happening is because a lot of you guys got to remember that Deshaun Watson controls where he goes. He has a no trade clause in his contract. So Deshaun Watson, to get traded, has to sign off and approve any trade. If not, the no trade clause is still going to stand. So therefore, Deshaun Watson does have some leverage in terms of who he plays for. And I don't really think that, organization like Washington would kind of be his preferred destination. His preferred destination have kind of been bigger markets, such as Tampa Bay, Philadelphia has also been in the mix, now Minnesota. But we don't really know how legitimate the Minnesota claims are going to hold because they still have Kirk Cousins. So you look at Deshaun Watson, I don't really think that he's going to be, a realistic trade option for Washington, simply for the fact that I don't think Deshaun Watson would want to play for Washington. On top of that, I think there was already some like a report that came out like sometime during the season, I forgot which week it was, that said that Deshaun Watson doesn't have any interest playing for Washington. Then you have Jimmy Garoppolo out there. Now, I think Jimmy Garoppolo definitely is a realistic quarterback that I could see Washington trading for. I also could see them trading for Carson Wentz. However, those probably wouldn't be trades that many Washington fans would be happy with. However, they are slight improvements from Taylor Heinicke. Like, regardless of what people want to say about Jimmy Garoppolo, he he's okay. Like, Jimmy Garoppolo is just inconsistent. You don't really know what you're going to get out of him game in and game out. However, there are games that he stinks, and there are games where he looks really good and he rises to the occasion. But if you're Ron Rivera, do you want that kind of inconsistency? I don't really know. So when it comes to Jimmy Garoppolo going to Washington, I do think that he is an option. However, I do think he's probably a last resort option for Washington. Like, if Washington can't get, the quarterback that they want in the draft, or they can't sign one in free agency that they like, or they can't trade for one, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is kind of going to be that emergency option that Washington goes with if they can't find nobody else better at the position. Then Washington changed their name to the Washington Commanders. And I'm not somebody who's really big on name changes and uniforms. Don't really talk about it. Don't really care that much about it. I don't get worked up about it. However, Washington definitely missed a good opportunity to go with the Washington Red Wolves, which would have been a way better name, a way more marketable name, because I don't really think the problem with the Commanders name is just it sounds a little bit too basic. Okay, the Washington Commanders, you probably could have did a little bit better than that, being honest. So the name change, I'm not too bent out of shape about it or anything like that, but, I kind of think that the Red Wolves was a little bit of a better option. You missed a big chance with the Red Wolves, man. You could have made some crazy designs on the helmet. Really, the Washington Commanders is the best thing that you can come out with. And also, you got to take into account that Washington had 2 whole years to find a name. 2 years, pretty much. And this is the best thing they could come out with? The Washington Commanders? Come on, man. And lastly, Washington has $30 million in cap space. And you look at the quarterback market and free agency, there's not really going to be a lot there. If Indianapolis gets rid of Carson Wentz, cool. They release him, cool. However, I still don't think Carson Wentz would be the best available quarterback in the free agency market. I still feel like Jameis Winston is probably the best quarterback out there. And, Washington would be taking a huge risk with Jameis Winston because he did have a pretty good season this past year with the Saints. However, that was under Sean Payton. Are you sure that Jameis Winston is this different quarterback? Or was he just a product of Sean Payton's system? And is he going to resort back to the old Jameis Winston that we saw during Tampa Bay when he threw 30 interceptions? So Ron Rivera is known as a risk taker. They call him Riverboat Ron for a reason. I just don't think that Riverboat Ron is willing to take the ultimate roll of the dice by signing Jameis Winston, because if you sign Jameis Winston, you can get him for a pretty reasonable deal. You're not going to have to break the bank, make him the highest paid quarterback. As a matter of fact, you could give Jameis Winston a 1-year prove-it deal and see what happens. But, when it comes to the free agency market for quarterback, not really a lot of options there. So if Washington's going to improve the quarterback position, it's either going to be via the draft or via free agency. And even via the draft, Washington's options are kind of limited because there are a lot of quarterbacks in this draft class that aren't really day one starter material at the moment. So really the quarterbacks by consensus that many people perceive to be, NFL ready are Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, and Matt Corral. I think those are the 3 QBs that, from what I've read in the articles and the people that I've heard talk about the draft, those have been the 3 consensus quarterbacks who many people think could end up being day one ready for the NFL. So those are probably going to be the 3 quarterbacks that should be pretty high on Washington's list. However, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Washington take a little bit of a leap of faith and draft Malik Willis. Malik Willis is known as a project player, but he has a lot of upside. As a matter of fact, he has the most upside than any other quarterback in this draft class coming out. However, there are a lot of things to work on, and plus he doesn't give you an instant impact right away because he may struggle out the gates as a starter unless your offensive coordinator can come away with, an innovative scheme for him, and I don't know if that's going to happen. So for Washington, you have $30 million in cap space, so you're going to have to try to bring back, some of the wide receivers that you're going to be losing. Adam Humphries, Cam Sims, do you want to bring them back? I don't really think that they need to bring them back because I do like a couple of the other wide receivers that they have on their roster, and it's not like they need a star-studded wide receiver because you already got Terry McLaurin, top 5, top 10, depending on who you ask. Okay, then you have slot receiver Curtis Samuel, who was in and out of the lineup due to injuries last year. So you get you another solid wide receiver and free agency. Your offense is going to be improved. Then when it comes to the offensive line, are you going to be able to re-sign right guard Brandon Sheriff? Because it seems like Brandon Sheriff in Washington always can't find a way to come to an agreement with a new deal. So is this finally going to be the year that Washington just says, you know what, we give up, we're going to allow you to walk away? But I look at Washington, and I look at the state of this franchise right now, and I'm really concerned. Because pretty much Washington needs a quarterback. And if Washington is going to make it to the playoffs, they're going to need a good quarterback to do so. However, the options out there that Washington fans are hoping for, I don't think are really all that realistic. Like, it's going to be hard to make a Russell Wilson trade happen. It's going to be hard to trade for Aaron Rodgers. So, like, some of the more, realistic options like a Carson Wentz or Jimmy Garoppolo, you got to wonder, is that enough to get Washington into the playoffs? Especially in the division where you have Philadelphia, who made the postseason last year or this past season. Dallas is still one of the most talented teams in the NFL. Like, what about Washington? Get what I'm saying? Like, those two teams have their quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts may not be as, established as Dak Prescott. And a lot of people may not be as sold on Jalen Hurts as you would like them to be. However, they're going into next season knowing who their starting quarterback is going to be. Meanwhile, the Commanders don't know who their starting quarterback is going to be, and they're kind of hoping that they can get lucky and get a guy like a Russell Wilson or an Aaron Rodgers or a Deshaun Watson. Like, if Washington is able to get one of those guys, it's going to be really lucky. And it's a really low chance that it happens. So you got to wonder if the quarterback you're bringing in is going to be able to get you to the playoffs. On top of that, you still have some inefficiencies on defense that have to be sorted out. Like, the state of the franchise for Washington right now, I'm going to say I'm not really all that high on them right now. Like, I think that Washington isn't in a good place right now because, like, you need that quarterback. And right now, the quarterback market and the way things are lining up in the draft isn't really in your favor. So, I don't know if whoever's starting at quarterback for Washington next season is going to be good enough to get them to the postseason. And on top of that, I know it's early in the offseason, we still have months and months for Washington to get their quarterback, but some of the quarterbacks that they're looking for, they're kind of hard to get. And you got to wonder if Washington even has enough assets to get some of these quarterbacks. And if you trade for some of these quarterbacks, you're giving up some key pieces. So, state of the franchise for Washington. You guys let me know how you guys feel about the Washington football team down in the comment section down below. I appreciate you guys for listening to this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. Make sure that you check out the JT Sports Podcast, available on all podcasting platforms. Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from, the JT Sports Podcast is available. All you got to do is type in the JT Sports Podcast on any podcasting platform and it will pop up. Every video that is uploaded on the channel is available in audio format on all these podcasting platforms. Make sure you go ahead, check out the JT Sports Podcast, leave a 5-star review, and I appreciate you guys for listening to this episode.